Welcome back to another episode of Spiritual Teachers Podcast. With me for the second part of our episode is Spencer. Spencer goes by JunkDNA on Instagram. Spencer is a metaphysicist, a claircognizant channeler, and a Law of One initiate. So welcome back on the podcast, Spencer. It's great to have you on again.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, we had such a conversation in part one. We had to have a part two. It was inevitable. So
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really excited because that kind of set the stage for this episode. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the Ascension process. We're going to talk about star family and galactic origins. We're going to talk about the Law of One, channeling and claircognition, vibrational alchemy and self-mastery, tarot and archetypes of consciousness, the Kybalion and universal laws, and the Starseed retreat in Mount Shasta that Spencer and his partner are going to be putting on this summer. So, yeah, I'd love to just start it off with just diving into the Ascension process.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're amidst it, aren't we? It's been quite a few years since awakening. I think all of us have been quietly anticipating something big to happen. And as we mentioned in episode one, there's such a juxtaposition with all of the activity of the sun, with Gaia, our planet, and the entire collective at large. I mean, we are one hive mind that is moving towards an even higher vibration, whether people like it or not. So, this ascension process is a very cyclical happening within the universe. And I'll just kind of give a brief overview just so we can understand and ground and anchor. But generally speaking, as we mentioned in the last episode, each galactic logos, which is just an alternative name for galaxy, is a mind in and of itself. So it's a conscious being that hosts all life within it. And more or less, as co-creators from source consciousness, God, it basically, their role, their service is to curate create the architecture of that reality within their sphere of influence. So this means all of the planets, all of the suns, all of the moons, all of the celestial accompaniment. And so what happens is there's an orchestration that basically follows a cyclical process. And this cyclicality, as mentioned with many of the ancient civilizations, has been come to be understood as, and mentioned in the Law of One, as harvest. And harvest is an opportunity for souls of all caliber to expand their vibration and consciousness onto the next threshold. So it's basically a spiritual evolution, but a very tangible one at that. It's not just a shift your mind temporarily to a different realm. It's quite literally relocation of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we find is that these cycles occur in 25,000 increments, years as a base. It's roughly 25,900 years, but we can equate it to 25,000. And each of those quarters add up on top of each other to create a master cycle, which is the accomplishment of all three in one. So we're talking 25,000 years, 50,000 years, and then 75,000 years of completion. So what does this actually mean being incarnate on a planet? It's essentially that as you live your life, as you go through the ambiguity, the haze of this illusion, and you learn through the expansion of your consciousness and through these catalytic experiences, what you need to integrate to become a more pure version of yourself, polarized towards the light, towards service, etc. Those acts act as confirming agents to the process for harvestability, shall we say. And this is basically a choice of evolution or stagnation. So for most civilizations that are currently within this process, and we're talking strictly the third density. So just to recall back to our previous episode, the third density is the entirety of space-time that we can observe around us.
Mm-hmm.
So when you point a telescope to the stars, all the planets that you can see, all of the galaxies, all of the nebula, all of it is within our local space-time density of third density.
Hmm.
So you can refer this as a dimension if it makes more sense in that way, but basically all of us, this entire field of observation and experience is one realm within other realms. But
Right.
the process of this cyclicality as we know it occurs in the only cognitive approach that we can, observe it in these cycles. I'm
Hmm.
sure it's much more grand beyond this, but we're going to talk specifically about the third. So, would say that you shift, as we talked in the evolution of consciousness, and you become a humanoid vessel or a bipedal figure. I mean, there's many manifestations of physicality throughout the universe, really. And you're in the third density. The first few lives that you're going to have are going to be very experiential. So you're going to have all of this happening to you, and it's going to take a while, the refinement of reincarnation and coming back and observing and learning to finally fine tune your self awareness. And that process of fine tuning the self awareness is that gradual evolution and approach towards a harvest.
Right.
So, generally speaking, Peter, most people or beings, shall I say, don't necessarily evolve within the first 25,000 years.
Hmm.
And there's a reason for that. There's an elongation of the experience. But as we approach 50,000 years, that's when you start to get small groupings, tiers that are actively ready to evolve and say, okay, this is the time. I've proved myself, the work is done, and I'm ready for the next experience. And I'm ready to ride this transcendental wave into the next realm. The only trouble with that is the lack of mass majority and consensus. So even at 50,000 years, and this is referenced in the Law of One, with our local time, like the last 50,000 years we've been a part of, our whole civilization, human civilization, only a few groups really were ready to evolve. And even they, in a very beautiful, sacrificial way, chose to forfeit that opportunity to remain on this planet, to be reincarnate back in this realm to help the others evolve and grow. So that leads us back to the present. So after all this time, we are presently at the end, the tail end of this 75,000 year cycle. And why that's important, this is what we call the ascension process. We are at the final echelon of this absolute beautiful experience that will transcend people forever.
Hmm.
And it really impacts the soul. So there's a lot to talk about there. I'm just going to pass it back to you, but that's essentially a core teaching of the ascension process is that everything revolves around cyclicality, divine timing, and integration of life's lessons.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's beautifully, the way you said it was really beautifully done. What came up for me is the Mayans. Were they harvested, quote unquote?
So the Mayans were a very interesting race, spacefaring, not, I wouldn't say interdimensional because it's more so they had crafts that we can study with all of their ancient glyphs that we've seen. But I think they were cross planetary. And so what's fascinating is that I think it was back in the winter of 2012. That's when we observed and we experienced astronomically the the release from the home star that was in that cluster that was in our nearby space time. The name of the system is evading me, but we experienced more or less what the community has come to know as a solar flash. So this is an enormous burst of energy, enormous release of light. And it really is interesting how that event correlated and corresponded exactly to the timeline that the Mayans set up. So you have to wonder, were they speaking more or less about their race and their own evolution, or were they talking about Earth itself?
Mm,
And what I think happened was it was a juxtaposition with their own collective consciousness within their own field.
mhm,
Because if you're a spacefaring race, you can be ready for an event and then go to said event and then have said event occur.
mhm.
But what's beautiful about this is that not only does it confirm that these events, these moments of absolute, spontaneity occur within the celestial realm, but they happen for us. So this goes back to our previous conversation about how we are nurtured as a planetary civilization by the sun. And the sun, the source of light, also known as the sublogos, an aspect or subconscious of the logos, the greater galactic consciousness, everything is orchestrated with intention. That is the most important thing to realize, that nothing is random.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have that happening, you start to think about, okay, well, it's almost like if you're watching, like, you've seen one of those radars where it's like a green screen with like
Yeah.
the swiping. Imagine that that wave that's happening is the cyclicality of the ascension process, right? And
Mm-hmm.
right now it's hitting star systems. They're having a miraculous explosion of energy that's absolutely transforming everything around them, and then all of a sudden we're in line of sight. So it's not necessarily that it's not going to happen. It's just, when is it going to happen? We can't see that line passing through space.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in direct sight of it. And this is beautiful because it to become, and this is something I want to touch on with you in a minute, is like, how do you become harvestable? What is this like? What do
Right.
I have to do to make it to this whole thing? We'll get into that, but more or less just understanding that there is a divine process to this, that you aren't just floating around in this hollow existence. You're part of the most miraculous event in the entire universe. And you chose to incarnate right now at this moment, not 300 years ago, not 90 years ago, right here in this pocket. And that's why it's such a blessing to be alive to witness this.
Yeah.
So waking up and experiencing your life is a gift. And I think you should really never take that gift for granted. But I want to pass it back to you. What have you heard about the ascension process? And we can kind of meet in the middle here.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just really curious about what the law of one, how they mention, what does, I mean, when I think of harvest, I think of like gathering crops, right? And it's almost a bit, in my mind, I don't know why, but it sounds a bit like morbid, because it's like we're getting collected by these extraterrestrials potentially, but that's not what it is, right? It's like we're ascending, and does that look like a lot of us leaving the body, kind of like, or like ascending with the body, like Saint Germain did, right? Or leaving the body, like some of the other masters. Like, I'm really curious about that.
Absolutely. Well, let's address the term harvest, because yeah, I had the same like initial reaction when falling into it. I said, that's a very strange name for it. But then when you start to really pick apart the metaphor, it's bringing out the potential, the things that are ready to go,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, you wouldn't prematurely pick a strawberry. You have to wait till the strawberry is ready before you bring it out. So I think that's what it really refers to in a poetic way.
Mm-hmm.
I like to call it ascension because it truly is the embodiment of elevated frequency. And to answer your question, it's more like we have this chemical 3D body, right? So we have blood vessels, organs. The more real aspect of ourselves is our energy body, the piloting force of the flow that's coming through the ether into our vessel and then enlivening the experience. Other than that, this is just a body. And
Right.
so how I've seen and have visualized the ascension is more or less a transcendence of the body itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that your body's going to evaporate or anything, but you can really imagine, and this is the best way to really tangibly understand the process, is that everything that we see is an illusion, right? So we've come across scientifically the observer effect. We've seen how light is both a wave and all of these things that have been confirming that reality is not what we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it all deals with perception. And what happens when you alter that perception to a higher degree, when you raise the dial, it doesn't mean that there's a cataclysmic like event where everything dies off, but it's more like the planet itself is completing that cycle of its service. and all other beings. And this is actually a really good point. I'm glad you brought this up because this actually explains the aftercare of an ascension process for all who didn't ascend,
Right.
which is basically you transcend into a realm of native vibration, and that native vibration is the body or the vessel that you'll have. So, for example, if we think about something like the transcendence of third to fourth density, and even fourth to fifth density, you take on more of a luminous photonic light body,
Right.
something that is semi physical, semi not.
Mhm.
And then beyond fifth, I mean, you start becoming one with creation. So it's a really interesting, like, reverse metamorphosis that's happening. But I want to talk about the actual process, and like let's start with harvestability before I get into anything about like those who don't make the process.
Right.
So we can think of this more or less like a graduation, right? That you need to accomplish certain qualifications in order to move on
Mhm.
and to grow. So, and the beautiful thing about Ascension is it's not complicated. This is the good news in the whole scheme of things, is that basically you have to adjust and reset your polarization to at least 51% service to others. And so, what does this actually look like? It's basically you embodying love to the greatest degree that you move away from self-service and you start to see one as all. So, when we teach law of one or even any of the universal laws, you're connecting the principles of segregated separation, and you're coming together and you're saying, oh, this being is another version of me, therefore I care for them as much as I care for myself.
Mhm.
And that is basically the very baseline of what will take you through this harvest, this ascension process. And what's really interesting, this is where it gets really deep, I don't think people have been talking about this, is that the ascension basically dials you in to your prescribed frequency of embodiment. So let's say that you're just in the beginnings of understanding. This happens in a lot of organized religion where people are very tuned and focused and empathetic, but they're still kind of controllable. You know what I mean? Like they're still operating on a free frequency based system where they have to fall into fear, the dynamics of choosing one path versus the other, and then the repercussions of that path. There's so much to this, but for those beings, even having the heart, even opening your vessel to believe that there's something more, that there's a divine afterlife, that there's a divine expansion of your existence, is enough to take you on from the third to the fourth at bare minimum.
Mhm.
And then for the ones that are even more encumbered with their own process, and this is why Jesus is such a pivotal figure on this planet, is because Jesus was teaching fifth dimensional wisdom. That's something that is not talked about a lot. It's like all of the teachings, everything that he was embodying was acclimating civilization or society to the fifth density teachings. It's a very specific niche because he realized that in that moment, humanity was only willing and understanding of a certain threshold of information. And that threshold could carry them in through the fourth to the fifth. So it's not that you sequentially have to hit every density, it's that you go to the density that you are most in resonance with.
Right.
So that's why and I'll pass this back to you. I'm sorry, I've been
No.
talking for a while, but that's why it's so important to affirm what you believe, what you know, and then actively embody that truth. So post awakening is all about what do you do with this information that you have? Like, how does this change your life? And if you start to actively embody it to a higher degree, then you raise your vibration, as we always say, but you sustain that level of consciousness to the point that through this ascension process, the sorting that's going to occur simultaneously. It's going to happen instantaneously. You're going to be reflected into the realm that you've been operating in. And for those who aren't ready, let's say for the fifth density, sorted to the fourth density. And that's a beautiful thing in its own right, because that soul needs the experience of fourth density to go on and so forth, and but yeah, that's basically to answer your question in a nutshell, the whole process.
Okay. Okay. And then, so in relation to that, is it going to be a large amount of people kind of transitioning, leaving their body, or is it going to be kind of like in COVID, where, some people are resonating in the frequency of love and having an amazing time versus some people, stuck in fear and lower density and not able to face their emotions and traumas and things like that? Is it going to be more so like that, or is it going to be more of like we're actually like leaving the planet, leaving this body, and we're like there's going to be a lot of us, at least sounds like at least 144,000 of us probably, right?
At least, yeah. See, that's the elephant in the room. If that whole period or era of our recent days have taught us anything, is that we quite literally are in a realm of choice.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to choose what you know, your perception, you have to fine tune your awareness. And so the good news is a vast majority will make this cycle. A vast. It's already confirmed because people are already very empathetic or loving. That's like the prerequisite. But then it also tunes into like when you really focus in on who is being self-serving, it's the minority now. The minority of humanity are the ones that are greedy, the ones that are taking, and the ones that are regressing. So what I find is that the ones that are meant to move on will, the ones that aren't are going to have to reset. So I want to talk about the reset because again, I haven't heard anybody talk about this, so it's really good to put it out there.
Yeah.
So we talk about the sorting of dimensional variety, where people are going to go, what soul needs next, and for the ones that choose through their own actions or unconsciousness to remain because they're not ready to move on yet, then what happens is Gaia in general has exhausted her service, right? There's a contract to fulfill this evolution or process as far as the ascension and harvest. And beyond this, there's not going to be any more civilization, at least for now, on this planet. So what's going to happen is the same thing that basically happened with Venus, the same thing that happened with Mars.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes inhospitable. And when we're talking just generally, like astronomically, you're not going to be seeing life on this planet. Coincidentally, or shall I say intentionally, there is another planet, and that's why when astronomers, they look out to the stars and they say, oh, there's all these other Earth-like planets that are in the Goldilocks zone. Why do you think that is? It's because those are templates. Those are next in line planets that are ready to be of service to the next wave of souls to be embarked on. And so that's a really interesting take because as you transcend the third density, you're not going to be having a third density experience elsewhere. So these realms that you go to are going to be very much full of light, full of absolute clarity. There's going to be no more need for illusion because the entire purpose and process of having an ambiguous haze of reality here in this moment is so that we can make the choice, so we can refine our awareness and then make this process. So that's why the ascension process is so important. But to the ones that remain, it's a beautiful happening. But guess what they're going to have to do? They're going to have to go through the three cycles again. So 25,000 years of incarnations. I mean, think about how many lives you can live in 25,000 years. And that's a beautiful opportunity for them to expand. And then just generally like looking ahead, you probably see that they're probably going to be there for another 75,000 years in our local relativity before they can even make the jump forward.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm emphasizing as much as I can through my teaching, my own embodiment, that we remain focused on the mission, that we remain focused, that we are part of something absolutely divine, and teaching and sharing that love with each other because it all comes back to love and stabilizing your love as your default frequency.
Yeah, yeah, that's really beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. I think that the ones that have started awakening and that are have been awakened for many years. It's like the part that concerns me a little bit is the people that reach a certain frequency, reach a certain threshold, and then get kind of pulled back into the Maya.
Hmm.
And some I've witnessed it several times, and I've been told that those people, even though they're dropping back into the Maya and into the illusion, that they still, because they were able to witness it and experience it, it's way easier for them to come back out of it. If But it all comes down to a choice, it seems like, right?
Yeah, no, you have that exactly right. It's so common nowadays. I've even faced that myself. It's not a shameful thing at all. It's that you have this awakening, you connect the dots, you have these divine confirmations that will forever be impressed upon your mind, let alone your subconscious mind. And for whatever reason, the catalysts that we face, life happenings, etc., bring you back to a stasis. And I think you said it beautifully that you're so deeply acclimated to that frequency that it just takes like even a single breath. Something I find so easy for me to return to my own sovereignty and divinity is just going outside and breathing with the wind. I mean, there's some everybody has their own way, but for me, just being with nature and feeling the synchronicity of like the world holding me is such an easy unlock. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We're shifting, we're pushing. And what's fascinating, and this is where I'm going to be very vague because I don't really want to go into this topic at all, but for any happenings in the world, social, any kind of low vibrational themes that are arising and manifesting, they're meant to reflect your own contrast. So you're meant to stand out among the crowd. You're not meant to fall into the fear frequency, but arise in the frequency of love. And so that begins by not letting necessarily words, perceptions affect your own, but be so affirming and confirmative of your own beliefs and trust the process. That's something I constantly say. It's like a catchphrase now.
Mm-hmm.
But you really have to trust the process because we are amidst this whole harvest cycle. And this is the last chance to truly squeeze through this opening and ascend onto a different life. And it's not that you have to be fearful if you don't, you just have to be loving. It's the easiest prerequisite. If you want to go on to even more complex realms, then right now is the best time to study such things as the law of the universe that we're going to be talking about in this conversation
Yeah.
and other such things. But this is the time to be you authentically 100%. Don't let it be swayed by anyone's perception or belief about you. And I know you feel the same way, Peter, because you are actively in mission and we're here just holding the ground, the frequency as best we can.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, man. And I think one thing I want to add to that is that what you consume, what you surround yourself with, the friends and the people you choose to have in your life, all those are the main factors that I've found that are determining of the frequency that we choose to be on, right?
Yeah.
And so choosing friends that are wanting to better themselves, wanting to continue to evolve, doing the inner work, aligning with these deeper teachings and these embodiments and really getting more and more authentic, right? Like more and more who
Yeah. Yeah.
they're here to be, their purpose in this reality, right? And then also the food we consume, right? Like staying away from anything heavily processed, any of the toxic oils, and being aware of the water we're consuming. The list goes on, because on the other end of the spectrum there's all these things trying to poison us and bring the
Mhm.
vibration down, and the skies are being sprayed, and there's all this stuff getting injected and this and that, right? So it's really important to really follow your inner knowing, and also like align with other people that are doing that, because from that space there's a constant up leveling where, you know, it's like reaching our hand down and pulling our friends up, and vice versa when we're
Yeah.
having a, you know, maybe a lower day or whatnot, you know. And
It's perfect. It's
yeah,
curation. It's exactly what you're saying. It's curating your environment to match your frequency.
right.
That's people, friends, foods, everything, content you consume.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I mean, that's the life hack, really. If you want to sustain your vibration, your frequency, not necessarily dipping down or reaching up, but being like in the middle of it is
Right.
the perfect place.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. So sounds like the harvest is coming. Is there any like span of time? Like, is there 10 in like a 10-year period when they mention that's going to happen?
So basically, and I want to just insert this excerpt from the Law of One because it's really impactful and just dialing in the message, which is this is from session 10, question 14, a response by Ra that says, "The moment contains love. That is the lesson goal of this illusion." So just to double down, really tuning into your love for others, for the self, for life, is that grounding anchor that will keep you in your frequency. But as far as what they mentioned, I mean, the series of channelings came out in the 80s, late 80s, like late 80s. And it was basically referring to right now, like this pocket of space time is that moment where things are amplifying. And what's really fascinating is Ra mentions how the collective frequency, so the whole frequency of the planet itself, is in the threshold of fourth density. So it's a really interesting elevation energetically of what we're like leaning towards.
Mhm.
But from the fourth, I know you've heard a lot of conversations about dipping into the fifth density, which could very well be the case at this moment. But we're not like there 100%. Like we're
Right.
not like physically embodied or incarnate there. So it's about like leaning into that pull, that tide, and trusting that all of the things that are coming through all these activated gifts are gifts from the higher realms that we're accessing now through our Akashic record and our DNA. But I would have to say that, and it's really hard because you can't be the, what do they call those people? The ones, the prophet. You can't be the prophet. It's not profitable.
Right.
But I will say that it definitely feels in my own field that it's like less than 10 years away. Like it's somewhere we are so close proximity wise to the happening that it's gonna be felt. And then another thing that I've received as a download is that there's not gonna be like an anticipation of when. There's gonna be such a deep understanding and like tangible knowing about the emanation or the imminent process of the ascension that there's not going to be any questions about it. It's just going to be like, oh, this is happening right now, and it's going to be like dialed into our consciousness. So that's the trust, is just wake up every moment, embrace the present moment with your own presence, and just fully be anchored in the now, because right here is what contains love, as Ra was mentioning. We are factions of source consciousness, God consciousness, and this was all designed for us, this whole process. I don't think any of us would have chose to incarnate back into this life if there wasn't a very specific reason to do so. I know a lot of us have sufficient experience to, or perhaps we've already been in higher realms, such as the starseed phenomena, and then coming back to be of service. This is also like that exit portal. This is the time to say, mission complete, go back to where you came from, experience life as it was. So yeah, I would say just as soon as possible, really. I'm not trying to expedite anything, but that's what I feel in my heart, that it's right now. And the best thing you can do is just make the moment, make the mess of this moment. You know, it's like just embrace life as it is. Go outside, treat yourself, you know, make sure you can get all the pleasures of physicality while it lasts. But at the same time, remember why you're here in the first place.
Right.
So as long as you keep that in your heart, your mind, you're going to be absolutely perfectly set for that.
Well, the last question that comes through is like, what about purpose? Individual purpose of each individual that could potentially be part of the harvest, right? Is it
Yes. Yeah.
that every person needs to fulfill their purpose that they came here to do and then they can leave? Or, or is that kind of like, okay, that's we gotta go. Like you'll handle that in the 5D or wherever else the next stop is, right?
Well, I'll say this to expand on that is that the mission's already been complete. Your salvation, your awareness of your own self was the completed mission. Serving others was the textured layers beneath that. And then the ongoing mission and the objective of continually being is to add to this collective and really broadcast, just as you are now, Peter. I mean, you're putting this podcast out for maybe souls who have never experienced or like had these interactions with intelligence and consciousness. And so what you're doing as your service is putting out a frequency broadcast to basically show people what is actually important to tune into. And from that point, that mission extends to their own awakening, their own sustained vibration. So I think right now, because we are all awake and aware, that was mission complete. That was okay. We came into a realm where we forgot everything about who we were. And for whatever reason, we peeked through the other side and we're back.
Mm-hmm.
And that is such a success story. So it's not about, I wouldn't say it's necessarily waiting for things to be fulfilled. The mission has been fulfilled, but the continuity, the time between now and the ascension is opportunity to absolutely be an even greater master, guide, a mentor for others, and to really serve through love. I mean, everybody has their own modality of how they teach, how they train, how they embody, and that's exactly what the rest of civilization and humanity needs. And that's, I think, a huge purpose for why starseeds and wanderers came to this planet, is because rather than broadcasting messages from the ether and downloads and dream state for those who are incarnate on this planet, we said, I don't know if that's going to work. Right now is a really important time to kind of like get dialed in and correct. So, what we're going to do is we're going to incarnate boots on the ground and be here in person in the physical so that they can truly see, observe us, and like listen. And so here we are. We had the whole great awakening. You saw how that whole wave was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whole era, I'm not going to be named, but that whole era we went through was a beautiful activation and catalyst for more to follow suit. So here we are in the space between, and even so, with the delay, I think it's an absolute beautiful time because I like to think is time in the contrast of being orchestrated divinely. I like to think that everything happens with intention. That's why the sun hasn't released this energy, there hasn't been a transcendent event, etc., just yet, is because there's still people who are choosing and that choice is being made actively. But the really interesting thing I'll tie right here at the end is that everybody makes the choice. There's not one person on this planet that is going to not choose. It's a subconscious activation process. So there's been a lot of people, as we've come to know, that have experienced divine synchronicity, that have experienced true spirituality in their own right. You don't have to be in a major cityscape. You could be in a village or you could be in the middle of the jungle and you can have these really close encounters with the divine. And whether you're to acknowledge them and actually honor their happening is the contrast between that or ignoring and dismissing them. And so that's the division. That's the choice is where do you want to be perception wise in your own spiritual evolution?
Yeah, I love that perspective, man. I love what you said about how we've already fulfilled the mission and now we're just kind of putting the icing on the cake and helping the rest of humanity awaken.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really beautiful perspective and I really like that. And I think in this in between stage, as you said, there's still an opportunity to follow your excitement, live life to the fullest, enjoy this reality, enjoy this life, but not get pulled into it too much, right? Like
Yeah.
remember the truth of it. And I think this would be a good tie-in to the laws of the universe and kind of tying into that. I think that would be really interesting to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said it best. It's really just being here and doing the most with what we're given. I think that's the most beautiful thing about being a way shower, a guide on this planet, is that every single moment is an opportunity to serve in a very unique way. And even if that's just to be still within your own self, that stabilizes the field of the entire collective. So, as far as the universal laws go, there's a book by the three initiates, as you've come to know, called the Kybalion. And the Kybalion is this very mysterious text, but definitely ties back into Thoth and all these other. That's the authorship is not the important part. The important part is the content within. And it basically lists the seven principles, the seven laws of the universe. And this is basically mentalism, all is mind, the correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, gender. The reason why we were gifted this awareness of the laws of the universe is to not only understand how the cosmos works, how to understand how this whole beginnings of self actually take form and shape, but to be kind of caught up to speed on creation itself. We're meant to be part of it. And the only way you can truly be part of it is if you understand what's happening. And so this isn't a text, as we mentioned previously, for those of a lower consciousness or a less developed consciousness. This is like an adept teaching. So these are for people who want to know more about hermeticism or the mental architecture of reality. It truly is something that once integrated, once known, changes your life forever. It changes reality because everything evolves from your like subjective observation.
Mhm.
So, I mean, just kind of going through them, the mentalism is like all is mind. What does that actually mean? It's that the entire the entirety of the universe, of creation, of existence began as a single thought. In that thought form, split to two, and so on and so forth, where you create this geometrical hierarchy of observation, like different vantage points that created even more thought forms and those thought forms. And that's how you get the foundation, the skeleton of physicality. And then just the correspondence that everything is vibration based. This is something we see with cymatics, especially when you start to play around with different frequencies and see that frequencies have shape and that shape corresponds to sacred geometry. Polarity is a really interesting one. This is what really ties back into the law of one, which is the division between serving others and serving the self. So it's a choice to pick that fork in the road, whichever path you want to lead. But the to not spoil the end, it's basically the positive polarity wins out. And it's always going to win out, even for the negative. Once the negative in the previous episode we talked about the negative polarity can go and ascend and evolve to this point, but then it gets sent to this threshold, this absolute stagnant, and it has to turn back, has to, because there's no denying the truth of oneness.
Right.
And the only reason self-service exists is because it denies the oneness. So it's a really interesting caveat, but you have rhythm, so everything ebbs and flows. The universe breathes just like you breathe in the air in your lungs. And cause and effect is a huge one, huge. Being representing and responsible for your own actions and how you treat others, how you manifest reality. Every effect has its cause.
Mhm.
And then gender, just the basis of the archetypal masculine and feminine and coming together as one. So it's really beautiful that the Kybalion basically is an operating device. Like it shows the mechanics that everything in life has to offer. And then it's up to you as the reader, as the viewer, to understand how this juxtaposes against your own life. Are you able to utilize these laws of the universe for your betterment? Or is it going to be something that is beyond your comprehension and then you'll eventually get to later on, which is a perfectly fine thing? It just depends. And this, to tie in what we were talking about with the ascension process, integrating the Kybalion, integrating the universal laws of the universe is that sorting agent. So you start to bring in that higher wisdom. That higher wisdom will be a tether that will eventually bring you and acclimate you to that vibrational frequency.
Right.
So I want to hear your take on the Kybalion as well, because I know you've had guests on to talk about it and your own personal experiences.
Well, I've read it. I've read it, and it was really profound. It's one of those things that when there's simplicity in it, but there's also really deep, deep depth and truth to it, right? And so I've found that there's that paradox in a lot of things in this reality where it's like it can be really, really simple on the surface, but it also is very deep. So that was my experience with it. And you mentioned the term hermeticism. So for those that aren't familiar with that, can you like give that definition?
Yeah, Hermeticism is basically continued teachings of mystery, really. It's basically the adept before the adept existed in general consensus.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for example, if you go back to Atlantean times and even into ancient Kemet, which is now modern day Egypt, you see that there was this teaching that was passed on and basically hidden from the rest. And the reason was because there was a lot of anger and dark energy towards like anything that was meant to shatter the perception of reality.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine like the blasphemy of saying that all is one when you have organized religions of the world fighting wars with a singular, omnipotent force that is vengeful, it's like it doesn't make sense. It contradicts itself. So this wisdom had to be kind of kept underground, and that's why the manifestation of mystery schools existed. These were places for initiates to truly come to the understanding of what is happening, really, what is really happening beyond the obscurity, beyond the concealment of this information, this wisdom. And so Hermeticism is basically the compilation of all of that. It's a path of the initiate, of the hermit, really, to fall into that understanding of who you are and why you exist. But more so than that, how can you do what you do now knowing this? So it's beautiful. I like the mysterious element of the Kybalion, especially with all the arguments and complaints around it. But the thing is, it's true. And if you just search your heart, you're going to know it's true, because there are certain things. This is why we delve into the realm of metaphysics, is we abridge the gap between science and spirituality. And in that midpoint, in that 0 point of space where there's a connection, that's where you're going to find such teachings as Hermeticism and the universal laws. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I think there's such a pushback, and that's obviously like socially engineered, but that's perfectly fine. Those who know, and that's the beautiful thing about consciousness, is you don't need anybody else to tell you. You just need to have that experience for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it's one of those books, it's one of those teachings that I can come back to over and over again and receive something different each time, depending on where I am in my journey. And it's not a very long book.
No,
It's not very long at
it
all.
gets to the point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like very, very to the point. And uh, you know, on that topic, right, of like these really deep, profound spiritual books, there's one in particular that came into my field many years ago called the Keys of Enoch. Have you ever read that book?
No, but I've heard of it before.
Okay. Yeah, it was one of those books that I opened the first page and I tried to read it and I was like, I'm not ready yet. You know?
Yeah.
It was like I'm not at that frequency yet to be able to really take this in. And it's been really interesting because it's been on my bookshelf for many years and I feel like I'm ready now, and I'm really curious, you know, uh, what whether you've been called to read that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, anything that comes up into my consciousness as far as like externalizing channelings has to obviously filter through discernment. I
Right.
haven't I haven't looked at it, but I've definitely been referenced it before, and I think it's great. I think there's beautiful things that are coming through right now, and for anybody that's seeking, and the same thing goes for the law of one. I mean, I advocate for law of one, but I want everybody to get that internal confirmation for themselves to
For sure.
understand the agent. But no, I haven't actually fully read it myself, but I am interested to look into it further.
Cool. Yeah, I was just curious about that. And then have you done any studies with the Kabbalah?
No, I haven't. With the
Okay.
Tree of Life. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, so that to me, I was telling you before the podcast where, I saw this guy on Instagram who was overlapping all these different teachings from these ancient mystery schools like we were mentioning, right?
Yeah.
And he took the information from the people in India, he took the information from the Kabbalah, the people of Israel, and that whole area, right? He took the teachings of the tarot, right? And I think one or two more, and he overlapped them all and showed how they all are connected and they all have this web of information that overlaps in all of them.
Yeah.
And I thought that it was the part that I thought was interesting that I've never seen before. I've seen the tree of life many times, and it's this diagram, right, that is in a very specific shape, and within the shape there's other shapes that break down inside of it. And so it's also like like there's the roots, the stem, and then the leaves up top, just like a tree. And it also there's different tarot cards that he correlated with each level of the tree. And it's not an actual tree, but it's representative of that, of also like consciousness rising, the chakras rising, the kundalini rising, all those overlapping. So I'm really curious. I know you've taken a deep dive into tarot and the archetypes of consciousness. So let's dive into that. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, and just to reference what you're talking about, I mean, it really is beautiful that things tie in together, that there's these connections to be made because each seed leads back to the same tree. It really is fascinating. And the reason I say this is because within Law of One, there is a mentioning of how to cultivate the magical personality. So
Mm-hmm.
this is basically avenues of study for refinement and spiritual maturity. And the three aspects that are mentioned are studying the tree of life, as you mentioned. That was actually verbatim written into the Law of One. There was astrology as a secondary. And then the third one, which I find myself leaning most into, is the tarot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just to discuss all three, the tree of life is basically the symbolic map of consciousness, the structure of it.
Mm-hmm.
Astrology is the cosmic bias and the catalyst system. And then tarot is basically the archetypal blueprint of the mind. So this is a very deep concept. If you're tuning in, you might want to write some stuff down. We're about to go really, really deep, and feel free, Peter, to juxtapose anything if you want in the moment. But let's break it down. So in the Law of One, there is a series of 5 books, and the fifth book being a direct testimonial of the channeler herself, Carla, and her whole experience of the process of channeling. So the fourth book is quite literally the summit of the wisdom, the intention, the teaching. And the law of one is just a loose kind of question answer system. Not every question was answered, but enough was to create a foundation. And in the fourth, we're introduced to the tarot. So before we go any further, I know there's a lot of taboo around tarot and the occult and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I want to brief that by saying that everything you do has intention. So if you intend to distort your field and misalign the energies, then that's exactly what you're going to receive. And in contrast, anything that you choose to embark upon with curiosity, with mystery, but more or less choosing to dissipate any lower frequencies or vibrations prior to the work is entirely what you're going to receive. And that's exactly what Petr did with myself just before we began this podcast, is alchemize and dispel any of the lesser and lower frequencies that weren't necessarily in accordance with our own energy.
Mm-hmm.
So tarot, in this very beautiful way, is basically an archetypal study of self. And this is the point that people don't necessarily understand. It's not a bunch of random cards with random meanings. The actual structure matters. So we're talking about the major, minor arcana, and I'll break it down into the segments so that you can like categorize this. But the first 7 cards of the deck is juxtaposed and correlative to the mind complex. And then the 8 to the 14 is the body complex, 15 to 21 spirit complex, and then the 22nd is the choice. And the choice is that one preliminary figure that we were talking about ascending from this density, is making the choice. So that's why it's at the peak of that process. Mm-hmm. But to go into the mind complex, and before I even go, Petr, do you have any questions before because we're about to go extremely deep into this. I just want
No, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, let's dive in.
So the mind complex, again, the themes of this is just consciousness, perception, identity, polarity. And you begin with the magician, right? So this is the conscious mind, and this is will, your willpower, the choice, the ability to manufacture your reality. You have the high priestess, which represents the unconscious mind, or your intuition, really. The empress, which is the catalyst of the mind. The emperor, which is the experience of mind. The hierophant, which is the significator or the core identity of your mind. The lovers, the transformation of the mind, which is essentially just a decision on polarity. And then the chariot is the great way of the mind, basically the direction of your evolution. And what's really fascinating about these is that they're ordered in sequence. So let's say that you have a tarot spread, and this, I didn't even get there. Let's talk about what tarot, like how you even do tarot. Let's talk about that first. Mm-hmm. So it is absolutely in my best interest to reference and recommend that you perform tarot upon yourself. Okay, I want to be very clear and discerning about that. Some people will go on to others and find that having an external influence will be the best for them. But the truth is, for me, having that intuitive, personal encounter with the tarot is something that will provide the best effort and the best like truth for my own process. So essentially, you have the deck. I'm just going to walk you a very closed loop here. I'm going to walk you through the process. You have the deck, you clear the energy space, you set the intention in your mind. Sometimes it's good to actually speak it aloud. The best way to really curate your session for positivity is calling in your guides, any benevolent forces that wish to aid the session or prevent, security, prevent anything from coming in. And then once you have that, it's basically division of the tarot into 3 card decks. So you shuffle, you split into 3. You feel out with your own energy field what's the proper deck to go to. So what I found is that, and this is a nice little tidbit, whatever your non-dominant hand is, that is the hand that's going to be more sensitive to subtle energies. So whenever I'm doing a tarot read on myself, I use my non-dominant hand because I can feel differences in the energetic forces. Mm-hmm. And so I'll have the 3 split decks there. hover it over. You don't have to have your eyes open. You could just really feel into it. Choose the deck that resonates the most, put the other two aside. You take that one and you spread them out face down, all the cards in front of you. And then from there, in that spread, that's when you really feel and you conceptualize the intention in your mind and your heart. And you say, what is this? And there's so many different things you can be asking. One of the main questions that I ask is a general kind of briefing is just, what does my higher self have to tell me in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
A very broad statement, but something that's simple enough to just get like energetic updates. So you feel it out, you pull the cards. Typically, it evolves in sequence, meaning like you can pull that card and then you can have a secondary question for the follow up. Or let's take like an even more specific route. You can say, what, like on the first card draw, you can say, should I make choice A or choice B? And that could be the first card. And then the second card could be, what will happen if I choose the choice made prior? And then the third one is there any place for improvement? Et cetera. Everybody has their own process, but you pull these out. And as you reveal them in sequence, you start to see that in order of like the numerological order of like 1 through 7, say you pull a 2, that's basically revealing at what point and what resonance your mind complex is at in a frequency base. So like you pull 2 and you say, oh, I need to work on my mind complex because there's XYZ going on. And then coincidentally, it can actually be a good sign too, because it could be pointing at something that pertains to the intention itself. So just be mindful that they're divided in order. And then conversely, as you start to shift onto the higher numbers, that shows more of an equilibrium within that aspect of your being. So if you pull a 7 in the mind complex, then your mind is very centered. If you pull a 14 in the body complex, then you have a very grounded body, and so on and so forth. So that's something to keep in mind. But essentially, the mind archetypes, they describe how we interpret reality before we even act. So this is all on the subconscious. This is everything that's floating around your field and your headspace to observe, to witness. And the reason why I've tuned into the law of one is and more importantly, why I've tuned into tarot out of those 3 possibilities that we mentioned earlier with astrology and the tree of the mind or the tree of life, is because tarot is something that you can actively receive new information from. And it's again a choice between everyone, but I just like being able to create a sacred space to get intimate information, get confirmation, get adjustment, because it's happened in my life, Peter, where basically my tarot deck, I'm not going to disclose which tarot deck I use, but my tarot deck is brutally honest to the point where it tells you the things you don't want to hear in betterment of your own journey. And so I'm very grateful for the neutrality of my deck and how I've been able to navigate the catalyst of life and the people I interact with. It really does pair back into what you were talking about in the curation element of your reality. So I use it in that same way. But shifting from the mind complex into the body complex, these basically are themes of your physical experience, your incarnation, catalysts through the body, etc. Mm-hmm. And these are cards 8 through 14, and they include strength, which is the discipline or power over the body, the hermit, which is your inner guidance within your inner incarnation, the wheel of fortune, which is the catalyst of the body, basically external events around you. Justice, the balance and regulation of the body, as far as like choosing what to consume, what to be. The hanged man is the transformation through surrender. Death is the deep transformation or release, that metamorphic process. Temperance is the great way of the body, so integration, flow, etc. And the body is, as Ra mentions, a creature of the mind. So, like the body that we encounter, we embody, quite literally spawns from our own thoughts. So that's why there's a direct correspondence between how you think about yourself versus how you are in the physical. and that's really important to really take in. But basically, it's just like your body is the patterns that stop being theoretical and become more real and more tangible because it's what we can experience. So, like, for example, if you have a disease, it's not going to be something you can ignore. It's going to be there. As far as like in contrast with a mental distortion, you can keep that kind of buried within. It's the physical elements that really surface and make you focus even more so on them. And that's why in sequential order, you have the mind, which is a general calibration of how you perceive reality. The body is how you embody reality. And then we move on to the spirit complex, which is the cards 15 through 21. And these are basically the themes of evolution, awakening, and your connection to intelligent infinity, which, for reference, if anybody's wondering, is the energy that stems directly from creator, from source, from God. And that's how you tap into that. And on the lower spectrum, you have the devil, which is the catalyst of spirit, your attachment to the illusion. You have the tower, which is sudden awakening, or conversely, the disruption of that. You have the star, which is faith, hope, guidance, the loving purpose of life. Mm-hmm. And then you have moon, which is the deep unconscious distortions. So something that you like fall back into, as we were mentioning, from a post awakening phase. Mm-hmm. You have the sun, obviously, the illumination, the clarity, the intuition there. You have judgment, which is the calling or the awakening. You have the world, which is the completion or the integration. So you can see the themes, Peter, how the ebb and flow, how you're becoming more and more occupied into a more mature place the more you focus on refining these qualities of yourself. Sure. And then all of that leads into the choice. So the choice is presented as the fool. It's funny enough. And that's all obviously service to others versus service to self. So are you going to choose to be part of that? Or are you going to choose to embark solely on your own subjective experience and cast everything else away? And it comes to a point where your life wouldn't be what it is without others. So I think there's such a deep respect for all the interactions we've had on this planet within society and how that's shaped us into who we are now. So basically everything that I just mentioned previous was archetypes of your own persona, archetypes of the you. And in studying and integrating and activating this, you generate a magical personality, which is basically a fully illuminated magical personality, divine presence, divinity, etc. It's like you in full force. And that's exactly what can stem from studying astrology, also studying the tree of life. So I wanted to kind of wrap all that in there and just say that the mind is how you perceive, the body is how you experience, the spirit is how you awaken, and the choice is how you polarize.
I love it. I love it. So how many cards are there total?
So in total, in the major arcana, there's 22.
In the whole deck?
In the deck, yeah. It all pairs down to that, yeah.
Okay. Because I don't know, like when I've seen decks, it seems like there's more than 22 cards.
This is the core teaching. And again, so something to really reflect is, where did tarot even come from?
Right.
Was it in the Renaissance? What actually happened? And the truth is that it first manifested when Ra became in contact with humanity within ancient Egypt. So all of these beings found a deep understanding when they started to approach symbolically who they were. You could see that with the hieroglyphs. There was such a deep connection with like symbology and messaging, so that was the best way to teach them in that regard. And so it began there, kind of went occult, kind of went underground for a while, until we had a new age, a new perspective where it shifted, it surfaced, and then you come back into modern day, 1950s on, very taboo, very dark, misunderstanding. And then now on through the Great Awakening, people are starting to remember what it actually is. And I think it's a beautiful thing to be at this moment of a renewal where we're
Yeah,
back to the true understanding. And the whole reason it manifested was to help people learn in their own way how they're actually being impressed upon the world itself. So,
for
yeah,
sure.
really interesting concept.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And you mentioned something before we started the podcast about how your partner helped you connect some dots. Did you mention that yet or not yet?
No, 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 no. So my wife, she has this beautiful understanding. Like we were both studying Law of One before we even knew each other. So it was kind of a beautiful synchronization there. But as soon as I hit book four, I was confused as hell. I had no idea what this meant, how this, I mean, I was generally familiar with tarot. I knew that they were in spiritual shops. I knew all this kind of stuff and I've seen some before, but then again, the unconscious mind equates that to witches and all this, nonsense that has just been prescribed in social. But the truth is, when you dive into what it's actually accomplishing, it's not about summoning entities. It's not about any of that nonsense. It's about understanding who you are. And
Right.
that's the most beautiful testimony. But I would highly recommend that if you're new to tarot, to perform it upon yourself, to really get that private intimacy of true response and callback. And I just want to thank my wife, Clara. I mean, she's the one half of the Quantum Light that we also host outside of JunkDNA. And she was able to kind of ease me into the understanding. And it took a while because I remember reading it initially and being like, oh, I'm gonna bookmark this. I'll be back in a few years when I'm ready to like actually dive in.
Hmm.
Read through everything, didn't really understand it, but now like years after, I can like be like, oh, this is important. This is very important. And especially for those who are like seeking guidance, the best guidance you can find is in your higher self. I
Right.
mean, there that is your tether to the higher realms, the one that is curating this whole process for you. Why not ask and receive? I mean, it all comes back to free will, so you have to be in the position to request that information in order to receive it.
For sure. For sure. So was there a piece that she put together for you or
No, we just studied in unison.
okay.
We basically reread through book four so that we can have that understanding and make the comparatives. But I'm very grateful. I mean, if anybody wants to know more about this, feel free to reach out. I have no problem answering your questions. We have things manifesting in the future about this, so I'm really grateful to just have the space to initially talk about it.
Cool. I love it. I love it. Was there anything else you wanted to dive into with that?
No, I think that's just the initial. I mean, we can make a whole episode. I think it's right now just getting people's feet wet to understand how the mind body spirit complex is involved in that process, how the archetypes of consciousness come into a physical, mental, and spiritual form. But I think we'll leave it there just because it is such a deep, complex conversation. And anybody that's curious about it, reach out to Peter, reach out to myself. We'll happily help resolve that curiosity for you.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, I think that's perfect for today's episode in that topic. And I think we can transition from here into channeling and claircognition. And I'd love to hear some of your personal experiences with it.
Absolutely. Well, and Peter, so many people in this community, they have divine ability. I mean, we all have the gifts.
Yeah.
They just rest dormant within our DNA. And so it's it's the process of activating and aligning with those, potentials that live within you to truly understand what's happening. So for me, as I mentioned in episode one, my whole awakening story revolved around the activation of my claircognizance. And this is the ability of inner knowing, if anybody's unfamiliar with the term. And essentially, as a masculine mind, my process mentally is that I wanted to connect the dots.
Mhm.
I just wanted to know how things worked, why they worked, and in more of a sense rather than like an inventive perspective, but more so like purpose driven. Like, why are we even here? What is this about? And so many people share that. And we do. We want to know.
Yeah.
And so in this beautiful way, I was activated. I didn't ask intentionally for it. It was just an affirmation at the one of the darkest points of my life. that came through in a complete surrender. And so I was just brought about in a beautiful way this understanding that if I can tune into my own consciousness, then I can hear from the other side these answers that I've been begging questions for.
Mhm.
So claircognition is basically direct knowing without linear thought. It's not that you have to like mentally like swim in a field to know. It kind of just happens.
Mhm.
And I was inundated by all of these channelings all at once prior to the manifestation of my page JunkDNA, and in such a way where I was so at peace with knowing. I mean, Peter, I couldn't even tell you how many things were flooding in. So I was just like in pure ecstasy. I was like, yeah, this is awesome. Like
Yeah.
this is really cool. And nobody wanted to share that enthusiasm, not friends, not family. So it was kind of this kind of dead space where I was just absolutely at peace. I'm like, yep, I'm alive. Let's do this. Let's get it going. But at the same time, like having an outlet such as Instagram and the conscious community at large is such a beautiful thing because we share these experiences. So it's confirmation through reflection. And claircognition, especially the aspect of channeling itself, is such a beautiful surrender in your own space. I was able to bring forth these beautiful translations of the universe in a way that hasn't been processed before. And so I'm grateful to even be here, and that consciousness flows downward into the minds of all who are ready to receive. But I'm just basically here to emphasize discernment. I mean, especially when you begin channeling, this goes for any kind of channeling, clairvoyance, etc.
Mhm.
You have to be discerning of the message. Because the thing is, it's if you can imagine the general populace of humanity as radio receivers, right?
Right.
Most people have their radio transmissions turned off. What happens when you have it turned on? Anybody that's broadcasting a signal is trying to direct focus to you because you are now the transmitter.
Mhm.
And so for those who are opening their minds but don't necessarily have energetic hygiene, then what's going to happen is you might filter in messages that are from the negative polarity.
Right.
So I found that, and luckily I can absolutely claim that I've never received negative fear-based signals, and that's because I chose not to. They never entered. I mean, when you're operating from a love frequency, you're not going to be receiving fear-based optics. You're not going to have these signs of doom and gloom pour into you. You're going to be the alchemist of your own internal signal. And so what happened was I was able to translate that signal and not necessarily be an authority of it, but just trust that everything that was pouring through was meant to, and compiled all these beautiful channelings. And the only way I can really explain the sensation of the process is that it's like it's like you're just in silence and somebody is whispering right into the ear. Like that's what it feels like. It's just like an inner thought that feels like your own, that sounds like your own, but is actually a transmission from a higher consciousness, i.e., the higher self. That's how I followed that pathway all the way. I'm like, where is this coming from? What is happening? But it was really cool because I was just like, oh, it's all me. It stemmed from me, and then at large from source creator consciousness. I'm like,
Mhm.
this is beautiful. Okay, absolutely, absolutely, I'm on board. But it is quite an experience, and an addictive one at that, where you just start to like want to be open. So I understand people who accidentally filter in the fear-based narrative is because they're just so excited that it's happening. They're so excited that they can hear, they can feel, but you have to be discerning of what's coming through. It's so important, especially in your own perspective and in your role for others. I
Yeah.
mean, for the ones who haven't been activated, they're the ones waiting and listening for these transmissions and resonating. So what happens if you bring in a fear-based narrative, then you're distorting their field and corrupting their free will, and I don't believe in that. So that's where I'll leave that. But claircognition and channeling, something I never thought I would experience, but here we are, and I've just been making the most of it as it's come through.
Yeah, man, I can relate. I mean, during my awakening process, it was like I was getting all this information downloaded, and I didn't even know what to call it, what I was experiencing. I also am really grateful for Instagram because back then
Yes.
there was all these little pockets of communities that, you know, I've during that time I found out what a twin flame was. I didn't have anyone else going through that in my life. My dad had something slightly similar at the time, but that was it, right? And so I found different communities on Instagram that were doing it, and it's not like now, Instagram was way more simple. You
Oh
know,
yeah, definitely.
that back then it was just images and if you could only write like a couple of sentences. I don't even think you could comment back then, but it was just way more, simple. There wasn't these crazy algorithms and stuff that we have now, but it was definitely a really pivotal point for me because without that I wouldn't have connected and felt like I wasn't losing my mind. And for people that don't have that, that's makes it a lot more difficult because it can really spin someone out
That
potentially,
is true.
but yeah, I can relate with a lot of that. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think it's a beautiful gift, and for those that are developing this, their claircognizance, how when people start to like, I wouldn't say lose it, but maybe disconnect from it a little bit. Have
Yeah.
you found ways to reconnect?
Oh, of course, of course. First and foremost, don't be shameful of your gifts. There's so much beautiful mystery and synchronicity with your alignment. So that's something to always tune into.
Mhm.
That sometimes you can be in the wrong place, in the wrong environments that won't nurture that within you. That's why the conscious space is such a beautiful place, is because here everybody understands in their own way of personal experience that you don't have to express or explain yourself. You
Mhm.
could just be you. And that's exactly what you should do. But let's take the perspective that you've lost it and you're seeking it and you're reaching out. So here's the ugly truth. The ugly truth is that it's all frequency based. So basically, it's tethered to your vibration. The closer you are in proximity with your highest vibratory self, the closer that signal becomes. The further, the weaker the signal. So it's not necessarily that you've lost it, you've just fell out of the threshold of range. And that range can be absolutely like recalibrated in a moment. I mean, the easiest way, and this is going to just sound like a general statement, but just meditation in itself can bring you all the way back.
Mhm.
That could just reel you in and really remind you what this is all about. Because right now we are so preoccupied with things, thoughts, distortion, field, everything that's happening around us in our own lives. But when you pause and you return to center, that changes everything. So I would begin there. And then again, use the supplemental nurturing field we have, which is nature. Go out into nature and see how it brings you back to stasis.
Mhm.
It is an incredible gift to have this world and the world feeding back into us. So I would recommend that. And then as a third, and probably final, would just be breath work. Breath work is one of the easiest ways to calm and still the mind so that you can start picking up on the subtle sensations. I mean, in a metaphor, you can think of like your conscious field, the one that's like ready to receive as an ocean. And that ocean could be crashing with waves, and you can maybe pick up on a certain topic, a thing, you can feel it, and the only way you're really gonna let that happen is if you still the waters. And you're gonna feel it like rain on a very plateaued surface. So that's exactly how to return the field and the signal back to a proper receiving end. That's what I would say for that.
I love it. I love it. You nailed it. You nailed it. That's exactly what, I would have said, and I think that's the deep truth of it, right? And like we talked about in the first episodes, there's different practices that can bring our frequency back up
Yeah.
and our vibration, but those three are some of the best for sure,
Definitely.
from what I've experienced. And then that ties into vibrational alchemy and self mastery and how to align with universal laws to live in coherence and purpose.
Yeah, I mean it's so funny that this kind of like tied everything together because it's quite literally been the theme of this entire conversation,
Mm-hmm.
which is like tuning your field, tuning your presence to what you want to attune. And basically, when we talk about vibrational alchemy and alchemy in general, what is that? It's transmutation. Transmutation is all about transformation from one state to another. And so it's not about like in essence it kind of like ties in if you want to think about the law of attraction, how you don't necessarily attract what you want, you resonate at that frequency of what you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so just time and bringing it back to yourself and remembering that you can reclaim your sovereignty at any moment, that free will is the buffer between choice and discernment. And so just allowing yourself to be the creator once more, to collaborate with reality and build from within, I think is the most important thing. And that's why, like, let's say something out of the blue happens, like a death of a family member or something like that, right? Something that will throw you through the ringer. It's almost a guarantee because it's such a shock. Well, the truth is that initial shock can be transmuted. And it doesn't have to be that specific scenario, but it could be anything. It
Right.
could be life just giving you a curveball and saying, okay, deal with this. And the best way to that I found to overcome these moments is to respond rather than react. When you react, you're in an unconscious phase of existence. When you respond, you're contemplative and can really understand the situation from above outside of your own perspective. And that's what allows you to understand why and how and what comes after. So it's beautiful. I mean, basically, to just quote Law of One here, in session 52, question 7, Ra responds, the discipline of the personality is the great work.
Mm,
So this is a paraphrasing, but it's basically your refinement of self. So when we talk about self mastery, we're talking about you becoming your best version, not for anybody else, but because you know it's the right place to be. It's your native environment. And that's why tuning into this, studying, as you mentioned earlier, the inner work, shadow work, etc., all of these transmutive frequencies and fields that we move through inevitably pushes us back towards our own mastery. And honestly, being in alignment is one of the greatest feelings. I know everybody has felt it at one point or another. If you're not in alignment right now, you know what your alignment is. You know what 0 point feels like.
mhm.
And it's not something, again, to be shameful about. It's just to say, I remember that sensation. I remember that feeling. How can I return?
Right.
How can I go back to that? And that's a missing piece I think a lot of people miss, is that they don't want to do the work. Fortunately, Peter, it's a choice-based reality, isn't it? It's, oh my goodness, it's about really understanding that you're responsible for your emotional regulation, your own frequency stabilization, the daily life versus the initiatory path. What are you going to choose to be and become? And for those who are not making that decision, guess who makes the decision? The universe.
Mhm.
The universe says, okay, so you're not ready to move beyond this. Here's more of the bad that you didn't want to experience. Have
Mm,
fun with that. Let me know when you can overcome that. And so in just the grand scheme of what we were talking about with the ascension process, tying everything together, is just realizing that you are responsible for your own life. It's a hard truth. You're responsible for your own life because the choices you make have an effect. And when you start to realize that, you become the alchemist by choice and transform and terraform your reality to love. So everything that happens around you is of your making. That is true wisdom, that is true mastery, and it's the core principle of vibrational alchemy, is
mhm.
that everything can be overcome, transmuted, and brought back to a state of pure love.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it, man. Yeah, I think that just ties it all together really well. in such a beautiful way. And we always have a choice to choose
We
love
do.
in any
We do.
moment, and we can always overcome those hurdles of, the procrastination or that's been a big one for me, right? Like, oh no, I can do that tomorrow, or I'll do that later today, or whatever, and doing things that keep me disciplined and having people hold me accountable and, you know, call me forward for me has been really supportive and really, you know, it's provided exponential support and growth, right? Because of that, because I've chosen people in my life that don't allow me to slip up too much,
Yeah.
and I think that that's a huge discernment, because it's not just like surrounding myself with yes men, it's surrounding
Mhm.
myself with people that are choosing to be better
Yeah.
than themselves the day before, right? Like just a little bit, whatever that is. And it's not about making more money, it's not about societal norms, it's about being more calm, being more at peace, being more present, being more, in love with life, being more in awe of life, being more excited about life. Like those are all qualities that I look for in people in my life. So yeah, thank you so much, man, for sharing all these beautiful wisdoms. And I'd love to open the space for you to share about the Starseed retreat in Mount Shasta and its significance.
Of course. And just to touch on what you were talking about, authenticity and reflection is such a gift. That is a service, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you do that process for others, if you say, hey, I see that you're not necessarily yourself, is everything okay, do you want to talk, you would be incredibly impressed how much people need that sometimes.
Yeah.
So if you're ever in a position to anchor another, that is in itself is mission, and I really advocate for that as well. And what's really beautiful, Peter, before I go into the Starseeds retreat, is that the whole thing that we just talked about vibrational alchemy, self-mastery, Claire and I, as the quantum light, we discussed this, and we actually created a free monthly gathering called Violet Light Alchemy.
Oh, I
And
love it.
this is a beautiful gathering of souls where we come together once a month, and to the juxtaposition of my own composed music, we ground in unison. And it's a really beautiful telling of those who are looking for time to do that. We actually created a space for that as well. So if anybody's interested in Violet Light Alchemy, reach out to me. I'll definitely put you in works with that. But the Starseeds retreat is a really exciting one at that. I mean, as you know, with our previous conversation, I'm based here in Mount Shasta, a place that you're very familiar with, Peter. You know the magic in the vortex of this place and all of the incredible sightings. The main reason why it's called Starseeds Retreat is because it brings forth the understanding that everybody is, in a greatest testimony, part of the cosmos. And many people have come here from different stellar systems to be of service. So this is a celebration and a reclamation of who you are and who you've become. And so it's just amplifying the field. It's returning back here to Mount Shasta to have this sacred land resonance, to generate group coherence and accelerate awareness, but also to truly integrate those teachings, because on the surface they can be, quite mysterious. They can inabort like the curiosity within you is like, am I a star seed, what system do I come from, all these thoughts. But what we do with our retreats is we anchor through true experience what you are and what you've become, and allow your mind and your consciousness to be open to receiving that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're finding those loose threads of our own self scattered about. And in a beautiful way, when we've hosted this retreat in the past, we found that beyond the UFO sightings, the plethora of lights in the skies that we've seen out here, we found that people were able to truly resonate with their own star family.
Mm,
And this enhances the mission tenfold. I mean, when you have a woman, and this is just a testimony from a woman, a past retreat participant, is basically she said she resonates so deeply with the cosmos. She doesn't know if she's Lyran. She doesn't know she's Arcturian. She doesn't know she's Pleiadian. And by the end of the retreat, she was like, I am Arcturian. It was like such a powerful affirmation. And like from that, I really was just sensing her field, and she was very grounded in the moment. And so it's this beautiful experience in person with us here in Mount Shasta that if it resonates with you and Peter, any of your audience or anybody who's watching this, absolutely. It's going to be held here in August 2026 in Mount Shasta. There's still spaces open, so feel free. We do have a limited occupancy, but we would love for anybody who resonates with this call to join us and just be here for the experience. Be on the ground, observe the night sky. Something beautiful about Mount Shasta, as you know, Peter, is like the close to zero light pollution. I mean, we
yeah,
have such a vivid vantage point and perspective of the macrocosm. And that is a gift in and of itself. So happy to open that space. Thank you for giving me the time to speak about it here. I really do appreciate that.
for sure.
But this has been a gift, Peter. I want to keep talking to you
I know.
constantly, on and on and
I
on, you know?
know. I know. Man, this has been so awesome. And all those links will drop in the description for
Thank you.
anybody to sign up, for anybody to connect with you or your wife. And we'll have all that available for people down below to connect with you guys. And man, it's been such an honor. I think we could keep going for several more episodes, but
Yeah, yeah.
this was awesome, man. I'm so grateful to have met you and to have connected in this deep way. And I think that our mission together is just beginning. So, sending you and your partner so much love. And until next time, brother, you're always welcome back on the podcast. And yeah, thank you for bringing all your wisdom. And it's been a true pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a whole universe and realm to speak on, so I'm happy to come back whenever you need me. But I just want to thank you, your community. Thank you for expanding your consciousness in so many ways. Thank you, Peter, for holding the mission, for just broadcasting this frequency into the field, the ether. Everybody that resonates with this core teaching will understand what we're a part of and what process we have to go on. So I'm appreciative of every opportunity. Thank you for giving me the potential to speak. There's so much more to touch on, but for now, we'll leave it there. I appreciate you. I appreciate the community, and I appreciate everybody as a divine expression of the one infinite creator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Until next time, take care.